50 kilometers north of Paris, there is a stone tomb that has been sitting quietly in the French countryside for 5,000 years. Farmers have walked past it. Tourists have photographed it without knowing what it really was. For most of modern history, it looked like exactly what it appeared to be: a Neolithic burial mound, one of thousands scattered across Europe, holding the bones of some long-forgotten farming community. In 2026, scientists opened up the genetic code hidden inside those bones. And what they found wasn't one community. It was two. Two populations, with no genetic relationship to each other whatsoever, who happened to bury their dead in the exact same hole in the ground. Separated by a silence so complete that an entire group of human beings simply ceased to exist, and nobody left a single written word explaining what happened to them. This is the story of how an international team of researchers used cutting-edge ancient DNA techniques to catch an entire civilization in the act of disappearing. The tomb is called Biri. It sits in what's known as the Paris Basin, and inside it lie the remains of 132 individuals, an enormous sample size by the standards of ancient DNA research, where most studies are lucky to analyze a dozen skeletons. This wasn't a single burial event. The tomb was used across two distinct phases, separated by a gap in time, and for decades archaeologists had simply assumed that the people inside represented a single continuous community. Generation after generation, the same lineage, the same culture, the same people quietly building on what their ancestors had built before them. A team led by researchers including Frederik Seersholm at the University of Copenhagen decided to actually test that assumption. At the genetic level, individual by individual, the technique they used wasn't ordinary ancient DNA sequencing. Most ancient DNA studies extract genetic material from a single bone, like a tooth or a piece of skull, and read what's there. This team went further, using a method capable of capturing essentially every genetic trace preserved inside the remains. Not just human DNA, but the DNA of pathogens, bacteria, anything biological that happened to be locked inside the bone for 5,000 years. It's a bit like the difference between reading a single page of a diary and running the entire diary through a forensic lab that can detect every fingerprint, every stain, every trace left behind by everyone who ever touched it. When they sequenced the genomes of all 132 individuals and mapped out who was related to whom, a pattern emerged immediately in the earlier phase of the tomb. The first community was a family, not metaphorically, literally. The earlier burials showed extensive, multi-generational kinship. Grandparents, parents, children, cousins, all woven into a single interconnected family tree, using the tomb the way you might think of a family using the same cemetery plot across 100 years. This was a tightly knit, deeply related clan, almost certainly farming the same land their parents had farmed for generation after generation. Then, somewhere around 3000 BC, the burials stop. And when they resume, everything is different. The individuals buried in the later phase of the tomb share no detectable genetic relationship to the people buried before them. None. Researcher Seersholm described it directly. The people who used the tomb before and after the collapse appear to be two completely different populations. Not distant cousins. Not a related group that had simply intermarried with newcomers. Two separate populations, genetically distinct, using the exact same sacred burial ground, with what the data suggests was essentially no biological continuity between them at all. This raises an unavoidable question. What happened to the first population? Where did they go? The genetic evidence inside those bones offers a disturbing clue. Researchers screening the remains for ancient pathogen DNA found traces of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for plague, present in individuals from this period. This places the Biri tomb within a broader pattern researchers have been piecing together across Neolithic Europe. Evidence that early forms of plague were circulating among Europe's first farming societies thousands of years, before the bacterium's more famous outbreaks in recorded history, like the Black Death. To be clear, the researchers are careful here, and so should we be. Plague alone is not being presented as the single smoking, gun cause. As the University of Gothenburg's Kristiansen, one of the study's co-authors, put it, there's no strong case that plague alone caused the collapse. But the total disease load, layered onto whatever other pressures these communities were facing, could have been one of several contributing factors that pushed an already stressed population past the point of recovery. What makes this discovery resonate beyond one tome in one French valley is the timing. This population disappearance lines up with something archaeologists have puzzled over for decades. On a much larger geographic scale, the sudden, near simultaneous ending of Europe's megalith-building culture. Across France, across the British Isles, across huge stretches of the continent. The people who built massive stone monuments, tombs, standing stones, the kinds of structures that took organized, multi-generational labor to construct, simply stopped. Seersholm connected the dots directly. The end of these monumental constructions coincides with the disappearance of the population that built them. Stone monuments take more than muscle. They take social continuity, institutional knowledge passed from elder to apprentice, shared belief systems sustained across generations. A community stable enough to dedicate years of labor to a structure whose payoff is mostly symbolic. When researchers looked at who replaced the original Biri population, they found something that reflects exactly this kind of social rupture. The new arrivals organized their lives completely differently. Where the first population had been structured around large, deeply interrelated extended families, the new population that took over the tome favored smaller patrilineal lines. And a notably larger proportion of the individuals buried together were not biologically related to one another at all. The entire social architecture had changed, not just the gene pool. It's worth sitting with what that actually means. An entire way of organizing a family, a community, a relationship to land and ancestry, and shared memory, vanished alongside the people who practiced it. The new population that moved in afterward weren't continuing a tradition with new blood. They were starting something else entirely, on top of the same patch of earth, inside the same stone structure their predecessors had built, possibly without ever fully understanding what the structure had meant to the people who came before them. This is, in a strange way, one of the starkest demonstrations available of how completely a human community can vanish without a trace in a world before writing. No chronicle records what happened to the original Biri population. No name survives for the disease that may have ravaged them. No account of whatever combination of crop failure, climate stress, or social collapse might have compounded it. The only reason we know they existed at all, the only reason we know precisely how interconnected their families were, and precisely how completely they were replaced, is because some of their cells happened to survive, locked inside their bones, for 5,000 years, waiting for a sequencing machine that wouldn't exist until the early 21st century. Which leaves you with an uncomfortable thought the next time you walk past an old monument, a ruin, an unmarked mound in a field somewhere. The stones remember nothing on their own. They just sit there, indifferent, while entire human worlds rise around them, vanish completely, and get quietly replaced by the next group of people who simply didn't know, and had no way of knowing exactly who they'd be building on top of.